Hi all, welcome back to History of World War II. So today I'm setting myself a pretty big task, which is to give you the origins of World War II. Now, a lot of historians, people believe that all you have to do is go back to 1918 Treaty of Versailles, maybe 1919, and events that follow that to explain what happens in World War II, and perhaps that's the approach you've been given. I believe you got to go back quite a bit further, so let's do that. And by the way, these terms are going to be what are covered in this lecture. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. I hope to keep this to a micro lecture, but you can always go back and look at these and see if you've gotten the main points that we're going to go through today. Okay, so starting with, we're going all the way back to 843, and you're thinking, okay, you're insane. But the only simple point I want to make to you here is that Charlemagne, the Great, he unites Europe, and his grandsons, and this is inevitable, they go to war, and they divide Europe into what will centuries later become the modern nation states of France and Germany. Okay, and as you probably can guess, not the best of allies. Okay, in fact, divided by everything. Religion, trade, land. Okay, so centuries of warfare between the two, off and on. Okay, so the enmity is not new. Okay, now 1815 is an important year because that is the first time in world history that the nations of Europe sit down, the nations anywhere in the world, sit down and try and dictate a peace that is through negotiation rather than through war. And the reason being that the Congress of Vienna happens. It's actually a series of congresses, and perhaps you can anticipate what preceded this. It was when a different vertically challenged dictator had ravaged Europe. Okay, and much like the ways that Hitler would, his swan song as well was going into Russia, okay, much as Hitler would. Okay, so, and not vertically challenged actually, but it's more fun to say that. So the Congress of Vienna is an attempt to redraw the maps, and the important point here is a balance of power. Okay, a balance of power, and what we get for about 100 years is really no general European war. So in that way, it's very successful. Okay, but yeah, balance of power politics is really important to the Congress of Vienna and the Peace of Vienna that follows. And you can see it here in the division of the main Germanic peoples into, or the Germanic people into two main states of Austria and Germany. Now, notwithstanding that there are no general European wars, what we get in this time is a slow growth of Prussia and the nation of Germany. Okay, and that begins with what is called the Zollverein, which is a free trade zone. So economic integration is what begins this. Okay, so Germany is growing in power, and this leads to some regional wars of unification of the Germanic peoples, which really upsets the balance of power, okay, and threatens the French. Okay, now question to you, what country is missing on this map? And you can probably figure that out. It is Poland. Okay, now I don't want to park there too much because Poland is super confusing. It's a state that's around for centuries and then is dissolved in the partitions of Poland by it's both Poland and Lithuania. Here I'm getting too complicated, but 1793 it doesn't exist anymore because the Russians and the Germans have swallowed it up. Much as they will in 1939, it becomes a reconstituted state after World War I. Okay. Now what's interesting though is that a lot of Germans, having annexed Poland and along with the Russians, have migrated to this region, and the German foot soldier will be surprised to find these ethnic Germans speaking this funny German dialect when they invade later on, so look for that. But yeah, Poland's super important, obviously, in World War II, so I just wanted to get that in there. Okay, so more consequential is what happens next, okay? And that is with this growing threat of Germany, the French decide that they will take preemptive action and invade Germany. Okay, not well thought out, given that they are the weaker nation, as the Germans then teach them very readily. Okay, as they take that attack and turn it into a counterattack, not only do they succeed in that, they get ultimate domination of France. They take Paris. Okay, this is after laying siege to it, famously, and bombarding it, during which, I love this, the Minister of War takes off in a hot air balloon. In any case, the French are completely humiliated. Okay? So their attempt to neutralize Germany is a cataclysmic failure, right? And to remind them of that, and to stick that to them, to drive it home, the Germans decide they will declare their Second Reich, their empire, right there in France, in the Hall of Mirrors, okay, the most symbolic place of France, okay. So right there in the Hall of Mirrors, they declare their empire. Now the Second Reich means Reich is empire. The first is pre-Napoleonic Wars, okay. And now the king rebrands himself the Kaiser, and he's Wilhelm I, and the prime minister becomes the chancellor. Okay, and that's Otto von Bismarck initially. So this is the end of the war, and we get a further unification of Germany, as in this victory, throes of victory, more German states join as well. So growing confederation. Alsace-Lorraine is taken from France, that region in between, and we get the Germans, much as what will happen in 1919. The Germans demand payment from the French for the inconvenience of having to drive over them and teach them a lesson. So this is a massive humiliation. And it leads to, well, this an inherent and embedded instability, and the French want revenge for this, okay? Revanche. Okay? So this is topmost in French mind, and we get those years, that 50 years, a whole bunch of drunken Oktoberfests, during which we have alliances forming, we have an arms race, we have inherent instability growing, especially as we get into the 20th century. And this is the origins of World War I, which we don't have to park on too much, but we get the rise of German sea power as part of that as well. Okay, so yeah, any case, let's fast forward to the war. And your conventional view of World War I is probably that it's a complete waste of human lives, and that there's no real aggressor, that every nation is responsible. Okay, and in some ways there's truth to that, but there's certainly a revision of that happening right now in the historiography, and most notably with this very noted historian with big creds, and that is Max Hastings. Of course, he's British. And he says that the Germans really were the ones to blame for the war, that the Kaiser was a megalomaniac, and it was really their stupid decisions and his desire for war that made it happen when nobody else wanted it. Okay, and it is true that the Germans were the first to invade. Okay, and perhaps you know the timeline. If you don't, that's fine. But he said it was a necessary war. It was not a complete waste of human life. So that's a fairly interesting point. And for our purposes, probably not super important. But anyway, know that this argument exists, and there's quite a bit more as well in this documentary, this BBC documentary that features is produced by Max Hastings, and I really encourage you to watch this one. Okay? Now, at the end of the war, as you have probably heard, we get the Versailles Conference. Okay, now Versailles, out of that comes the Versailles Treaty, and we're going to back up and look at the German Revolution and how this all happened in a second. But our sense of the Versailles Treaty is it's a complete disaster and leads directly to World War II. And in fact, Ferdinand Foch famously said, this is not a peace, it's a 20-year armistice, right? So we look back and go, okay, that must be true, because look at that, within months of what he predicted, the World War II does break out. Now that's been revisited quite a bit. Now before I get into that, I know that the Versailles Conference is like the Congress of Vienna. It is European states, now with the assistance of America, coming over and forging a new world reality, including a new world government, the League of Nations. Now that was the idea of Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson took America into war in 1917 with the famous 14 points. Now the 14 points are typical American idealism, at least the first few, and that is free trade. It is the free trade of goods around the world, and free passage of through fascists in the oceans, and Americans often are triggered into war with incidents at sea, and importantly, this new world government, the League of Nations, is what he really wants. Okay, now ironically, at the end of the day, America doesn't join. But that's another story. And what you want to know is there's many countries involved, dozens in the Versailles negotiations, but all the combatants are there. But really, the only three that matter are the three main leaders, and that is Lloyd George of the United Kingdom, it is Clemenceau of France, and Woodrow Wilson of the States. Now, Woodrow Wilson is the only idealist, so that makes, idealists are often the butt of jokes, and cynics always decry them, but also makes them into natural leaders. And he really is a leader of the three. That said, he doesn't get what he wants. He doesn't get everything he wants, and that's the main thing about the Versailles Treaty, is it becomes a compromise between what the French want, which is to stick it to Germany in the worst way possible, and what the British want, which is to rebuild Europe in a way that they won't have to get involved again. And that's what the British are always after, that balance of power on the continent, because their power is naval. They have a small standing army. They don't want Europe. They don't want to be involved in European conflicts. Okay, so that's basically the British perspective. More complicated than that, but the French, not very complicated at all. Stick it to Germany, make sure they can never do this to us again. And then Woodrow Wilson, who really wants to broker a new world peace, and he's really putting his I was going to say he's hanging his butt out there, because this is the first time a sitting U.S. president has left the country for Europe during his tenure, and it's meant to be for a short period. It ends up being 6 months of negotiations, 6 months that the president is in Europe leading these talks. Okay, that can finally wrap up in June. Okay, Margaret Macmillan is a Canadian-British historian of note, and wrote this very well received book, 6 Months That Changed the World, where she talks about this, and she comes up in that Max Hastings documentary as well. So again, I encourage you to watch that one. Now, she is the granddaughter of Lloyd George, and not surprisingly, she says, these allies did the best that they could with what they had at the time. Okay, so but what Versailles is famous for is, it sets up a League of Nations, which becomes fairly ineffective fairly fast, but also German reparations, okay? That Germany now has to pay, much like the French had to pay in 1871, the Germans now have to pay for what they did. It's stuck with massive military restrictions, a small standing army of 100,000, and territorial losses. Okay, so let's look at that. This is the German Empire before the war, okay, and this is Germany after the war. Okay, they lose 13% of their territory. They lose about 12% of their population, millions of people. Their colonies are reassigned. The Versailles Agreement runs to hundreds of pages, and it has some bizarre things in it. Okay? Telephone poles have to go to France and Belgium and other countries that they've invaded. Cows, sheep, horses, stallions, and they list the ages of each of these, right, and the types. Okay, it's unbelievably specific. The Germans lose random things like their patent to aspirin. Okay, undersea cables. Right, their colonies, as I said, they lose them. They get reassigned to the victors. Okay. They also get stuck with the famous war guilt clause that they have to sign, that they started the war, therefore they were responsible for it and must pay these reparations. Now, what really matters is that this makes the Germans feel they've been hard done by, okay, and that compromise between the three it is not helpful, because it leaves Germany in what I would call a dangerous limbo, okay, between being vanquished and not, okay, having enough resources to come back. Okay? And there's a famous quote by Machiavelli, and he says, if your enemy is in water up to his neck, you best push him under. finish him off. If he's in water up to his knees, in other words, he's coming ashore, you best help him to shore, make him into your friend at this point. Okay, so that's a great quote. Machiavelli really describes where Germany is at after the war and the failure of Versailles to either finish them off, this compromise. It means they don't get finished off and they become a threat again. But they also have enough grievances now to feel hard done by and to where the right wing can position themselves as an enemy of Versailles. Actually, the left and the right are united in that Germany was screwed over by the Versailles Agreement, and to the extent that their new government abides by it, they are illegitimate. Okay, and that new government is the Weimar Republic. So let's look at how that happens. Okay, so and also I want to give you more on the resentment in Germany, the stab in the back theses, and this German motto, which becomes the motto of the tiny Reichswehr after Versailles, of Im Feld unbesiegt, in the field undefeated. Okay, so what is this about? Well, the Germans believed they were winning the war, and in fact they were. Okay, and that's part of the problem, that in June of 1918 the Germans are winning the war in the famous Ludendorff offensive, okay, where they this is where the Germans get all the way to the suburbs of Paris and they begin shelling it. Okay? And the Kaiser even calls a national holiday, believing that they have won. Okay? And then 100 days later, they've lost, and the government falls. And so the Germans on the home front have really not had time to adjust to the new reality. That's part of it. Okay? And then the new or the political parties in Germany have gained a lot of traction, and especially the right wing, in blaming the politicians on the home front for what happened. So they become known as the November criminals. They signed away Germany's future, even though we were winning, right? And as I said, the army limited to 100,000 people now. The Navy basically, the submarines are taken away. The Navy is very, very limited. Germany cannot have an air force anymore, but there still is a small standing army, and their motto becomes "in the field undefeated." Now, the rumor grows as well in the whole stab in the back theses, and part of that is that it was communists in Berlin, and many of them are Jewish, that there was a Jewish conspiracy to overthrow the government, and that's why Germany could be treated so abysmally by the victors in World War I. Okay, so that idea starts to grow of a Jewish conspiracy. That stab in the back thesis is definitely tied to that. Okay? Now, the interesting thing is the communists are not super involved in the events that lead up to the defeat of the German government. Okay, and I'll get to that in a second. Hopefully you're not confused yet. But in any case, if you want more on this, watch this documentary, World War I in Color. Great stuff. Part 6, Victory and Despair. Start at the 937, 940 point, and that's where you will get the Versailles Treaty and what happens there, and the context of what's going on that I'm about to explain to you. And the bigger point I want to make to you is that this whole idea of the Im Feld unbesiegt, easily refuted. Okay, in a bunch of ways, it's not true. Okay, and that's what I want to prove to you here. And one thing is the Russian Revolution. Okay, a Russian Revolution leads to a working class. It's a model for the working class around the world of what can be done. Okay, now towards the end of the war, who's paying the most for the war is the working class, and they're really inspired by this communist model, by what has happened in Moscow, in Russia, right? And so that is definitely a big injection into what happens here in this incipient revolution that's beginning to build towards the end of that last 100 days. Okay? Also in that time period, we have an effective Royal Navy blockade of Germany. Now, what's interesting is the Germans will learn a lot from that, and they will be very intentional about making sure that doesn't happen in World War II. And in fact, they will manage to blockade England with their U-boats. But this leads to hunger in Germany, and hundreds of thousands actually die of starvation. That's not widely known, and it also leads to a lot of strikes. Now those strikes are ruinous. They're really bad because the economy has already production is already down by over 50% because of the blockade. Okay, and super important, obviously, munitions during the war. Any case, the other thing is that the Balkan front goes down. We tend to focus on the Western front. There's also an Eastern or a Balkan front, and Austria-Hungary goes under. Okay, they collapse. Okay? So that is late summer of 1918, and that's an ally of Germany, so they're gone. By August, then, you start to get pushes of the German armies. The Ludendorff offensive is completely reversed, and we get pushes by Anzacs, that's Australians and New Zealanders. We also get Canadians pushing, and the British, and the Germans are in retreat. In fact, they end up in Belgium by the end of the war. Okay, so they're pushed out of France. And the other big point is that the Americans get into the war in 1917. Okay, Wilson brings America into the war in spite of the fact that he got in, he was voted in under the motto, he kept us out of war. But in any case, the Americans cannot stay out of the war for a variety of reasons, and that really changes things, because in a war of attrition, where so many millions have died, and having these fresh bodies and millions of them really is what changes things. Okay, so the U.S. gets involved, and this matters also for World War II because the sinking of the Lusitania with a lot of prominent Americans on board, but also the Zimmermann telegram, where the Germans, and it gets decoded by the British and the Americans find out about it, where the Germans are inviting Mexico to invade America, which incredible mistake on the part of German diplomacy. Any case, with all that, by the end of September, the Army Command tells the Kaiser that the war is lost. Okay? So, and we go from that into the November Revolution. By the 24th of October, we have a sailors' mutiny in Germany, the Kiel Mutiny. Now, it's fascinating how much this is exactly what happened in Russia, okay, in 1917. Now, that mutiny spreads to German civilians, and pretty soon we get working class councils set up and soldier councils, and socialist parties are very involved in what's happening here. Now note that communists are not leaders in this, but they really are inspired by events that happen in Russia. Now, on the 9th in the context of that, and riots in Berlin, and it looks like the overthrow of the government, right, the mob rule, the chancellor resigns and dissolves the government, okay, in the face of impending revolution. That matters. That's why it's called the November Revolution, because the government does fall. And a new government is established, a temporary one, to avoid revolution, okay? And so the Kaiser is also forced to abdicate by his generals. He goes off to Holland and takes all of his bling from his 36 houses, puts them on train cars, takes them to Holland, and the Germans will find him there when they invade Holland in World War II, and aren't quite sure what to do with him at that point. Any case, a republic is declared. Okay, now this is the end of the militaristic autocracy that took Germany into the war, and that autocracy really is an appropriate term for what Germany had been, because it's really a nexus of the military, the nobility, and the Kaiser. Okay, now. November Revolution succeeds, the important point being that the new government, that old guard, that nexus I just told you about, can now blame the new government for everything that happens subsequently, right, including the Versailles Treaty. So the right wing in Germany can very much blame all this on the Social Democrats, on the new government, right, on the November criminals. Okay. Now, the November 11th deal is really a ceasefire with an option to resume hostilities at any point, but that doesn't end up happening. What happens is we have, by January, the nations of the world come together to negotiate the peace. Okay? And as I said before, I gave you the leaders in that, and out of that comes the Versailles Treaty of June 1919 with the famous war guilt clause that the Germans started the war, therefore they must pay for it. Now the historians are unanimous in the fact that it was really a mistake not to invite Germany to the talks. They were not invited to the talks at Versailles. That leads into this myth of this idea that they were treated unfairly, right? And in that way, it really is a big injection to both the right wing and the left wing in Germany, both of which complain that their new government, to the extent that it abides by the Versailles Treaty, is illegitimate. Okay? And that's really important. Okay? That's where the right and the left are united, and we'll get back to that. But in any case, in the turmoil that follows in Germany. So this is the Weimar period. The Germans are forced to sign this treaty under duress, and we go into what is known as the Weimar Republic. Okay, this is the German democratic government. It's the first experiment in democracy in Germany, and it lasts from 1919 to 1933. Okay, I don't think I have a lot more to fill in here for you, and we're going to look at why things go so badly wrong. And one point I want to make to you, I guess I'll close on this, is those reparations. So the Germans feel very hard done by, and kind of looking ahead of where we'll go in the next lecture, those reparations are never paid by the Germans anyway. Right? And were they unrealistic? If you look at Margaret Macmillan and Max Hastings, it would say no, they were not, and they have a strong argument that way. Even if Germany had paid the full reparations, that's a point I want to make, it would have been like a long-term mortgage that would have been finished by 1986. Okay, that's a long time, but it's not impossible. It's not inconceivable. And put that in perspective, the British were paying for what they had borrowed for World War II right up until 2007, and that's when they wrote their final check to the Canadian and the American governments for what we had given them during World War II so that they could fight it. Okay, so yeah, it's not inconceivable that the Germans could have done that, but in fact, they don't end up paying those reparations. They get cut in half soon after, and then when they can't pay that, the Americans step up and lend them the money so that they can pay the rest, and eventually they don't pay it at all. Okay, so in any case, that's the point I wanted to finish with. But Weimar Republic, established 1919, and again, first experiment in German democracy, and it doesn't go super well. Okay, so thanks for listening. Any questions, let me know.